My name is Bella, and I'm 28. This looks like school cafeteria leftovers, my sister-in-law spat, making a disgusted face at my dinner table. Do you people actually eat this garbage every day? Everyone stopped eating. I took a deep breath, smiled, and murmured quietly, "How interesting your opinion." Considering who actually cooked it. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with the knife Stella had just used to slash my evening into pieces. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt completely blindsided by family drama. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Let me backtrack to how I ended up hosting the dinner party from hell, because trust me, this story gets way more twisted than you'd expect. See, Stella wasn't always my sister-in-law. She used to be my college roommate, back when I thought sharing Pop-Tarts and staying up until 3 a.m. studying for finals was the definition of loyalty. We lived in the tiniest dorm room known to mankind, where you literally couldn't open both closets at the same time without creating a furniture traffic jam. Stella came from money, but not the kind she wanted people to know about. Her parents had this weird situation where they were wealthy enough to afford her tuition, but apparently too cheap to pay for her travel expenses. At least that's what she told me every single holiday break when she'd give me those puppy dog eyes and mention how expensive it would be to fly home to Connecticut. You know that moment when you realize you've been training your own replacement? Yeah, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. My parents are being ridiculous about airfare again, she'd say, flopping dramatically onto her narrow dorm bed. I guess I'll just stay here and eat cafeteria food for Thanksgiving. Like an idiot, I fell for it every time. Come home with me, I'd offer, already mentally calculating how to explain to my mom that we'd need an extra place setting. My parents won't mind. And they didn't mind. My mom loved having another daughter around, and my dad enjoyed having someone new to share his terrible dad jokes with. My older brother Jake was home from his job in the city, and the house felt fuller, warmer, more complete with Stella there. She fit right in, almost too perfectly. She laughed at Dad's stories, helped Mom with the dishes, and even joined our family's ridiculous tradition of playing charades after dinner. Looking back, I should have noticed how carefully she observed everything, how she took mental notes about our family dynamics, our inside jokes, our weaknesses. But I was young and naive, and I thought friendship meant opening your home to someone who needed it. Funny how some people mistake hospitality for an internship program. The first few holiday visits were genuinely fun. Stella seemed grateful, always bringing small gifts from my parents and helping out around the house. She'd tell stories about her fancy prep school in a way that made it sound horrible rather than privileged, and my parents ate it up. Poor girl, my mom would whisper to me in the kitchen. She seems so lonely. By our junior year, Stella was practically part of the furniture in our house. She knew which cabinet held the good china, which drawer contained the takeout menus, and exactly how my dad liked his coffee in the morning. She remembered birthdays, asked about my mom's book club, and even sent my grandmother a Christmas card. She's like the sister you never had, my mom would say. And I'd smile and agree because I thought it was true. I couldn't have known that Stella was methodically learning everything about my life so she could eventually take it over. The warning signs were there, scattered like breadcrumbs through our college years, but I was too busy being a good friend to see them. That's the thing about predators. They don't announce themselves with fanfare and dramatic music. They slip in quietly, wearing the mask of gratitude and friendship, until they've studied you well enough to know exactly where to strike. Junior year was when things started getting weird, though I didn't recognize it at the time. Stella began paying extra attention to her appearance whenever we were heading home for breaks. She'd spend hours getting ready, trying on different outfits and asking me which one made her look more approachable or family-friendly. "Do I look like girlfriend material?" she asked one Friday afternoon, modeling a sundress I'd never seen before in our cramped dorm room mirror. "Girlfriend material for who?" I laughed, barely looking up from my economics textbook. "Are you planning to hit on someone's cousin at my family barbecue?" She didn't answer directly, just smiled this secretive little smile that should have set off alarm bells. Instead, I went back to studying while she continued her fashion show, completely oblivious to the fact that she was essentially costume shopping for her next role, my brother's girlfriend. Nothing says grateful houseguest quite like conducting a 4-year case study on your host family. Jake was 26 then, working some high-stress job in marketing that required him to wear ties and drink too much coffee. He'd always been the responsible one, the one who called home every Sunday and remembered to send flowers on Mother's Day. When he was home, he was usually either helping Dad fix something around the house or collapsed on the couch, too exhausted to do much besides watch television. He barely noticed my college friends during previous visits. We'd all just been Bella's roommate, or some girl from school to him. Background noise in his brief moments of downtime. But that summer, something shifted. Maybe it was the way Stella lingered in the kitchen while he grabbed his morning coffee. Maybe it was how she suddenly developed an interest in his favorite baseball team, asking detailed questions about player statistics during dinner. Or maybe it was the way she'd appear whenever he was outside working on his car, offering to hand him tools she definitely didn't know the names of. "Your brother seems really stressed," she mentioned casually one evening as we sat on the back porch. "Does he always work such long hours?" "Unfortunately, yeah," I replied, not thinking much of it. "His company is pretty demanding. That's why he loves coming home. He can actually relax here." "That's so sad," Stella said, and there was genuine sympathy in her voice. "He deserves someone who understands how hard he works." At the time, I thought she was just being caring. Stella had always been good at reading people, at saying exactly what they needed to hear. It's part of what made her such a good friend back then. She remembered when you had exams, checked in when you were stressed, and always knew the right thing to say when you were having a bad day. I didn't realize she was doing market research. The breakthrough moment happened during our family's annual 4th of July barbecue. Jake was manning the grill, sweating in the summer heat and trying to keep track of everyone's burger preferences, when Stella appeared beside him with a cold beer and an offer to help. "You look like you could use this," she said, handing him the bottle. "And maybe an extra pair of hands?" I watched from the picnic table as they worked together, Stella asking questions about cooking times, and Jake explaining the difference between medium and medium rare. She laughed at his jokes, complimented his grilling skills, and somehow managed to make standing over a hot grill look like the most fascinating activity in the world. "She's really something," my dad commented, nodding toward the grill. "Smart girl. And she clearly appreciates your brother." My mom beamed. "She'd be perfect for him, wouldn't she? They seem so natural together." I felt a weird twist in my stomach that I couldn't quite identify. "Stella's my friend," I said automatically. "She's not... she's here as my guest." "Of course, sweetheart." Mom patted my arm. "I just think it's nice that she gets along so well with everyone." That night, after most of the family had gone to bed, I found Jake and Stella sitting on the front porch swing, talking quietly and laughing at inside jokes that apparently already existed between them. The porch light created this warm, intimate circle around them, and for the first time, I felt like an outsider in my own home. "Hey guys," I said, stepping outside. "Getting some air?" "Just talking," Jake said, but there was something different in his voice. Something softer. Stella smiled at me, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Your brother was telling me about his job. It sounds really challenging." "Yeah, Jake's always been a workaholic," I said, settling into one of the porch chairs. "Even in high school, he was the guy with the 5-year plan and the color-coded calendar." "There's nothing wrong with being ambitious," Stella said, and I caught the slight defensive edge in her tone. "I didn't say there was," I replied, confused by her reaction. The conversation felt stilted after that, like I'd interrupted something important. Eventually, I excused myself and went inside, leaving them to their quiet conversation and the growing connection I was too naive to see as a threat. I should have charged tuition for all those family dynamic lessons. The morning after the barbecue, I woke up to find Stella already dressed and putting on makeup at 7 a.m., which was basically unheard of for someone who usually considered noon an early wake-up time. "Hot date with my accounting textbook?" I mumbled, still half asleep and definitely not prepared for the conversation we were about to have. "Actually," she said, not turning away from our tiny mirror, "Jake offered to show me around town before we drive back to school tomorrow." I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. "He did?" "Mm-hmm. He said there are some historical sites I might find interesting." She applied lipstick with the precision of someone preparing for battle. "He's picking me up in an hour." "Since when are you interested in local history?" I asked, because in 3 years of friendship, Stella had never expressed even mild curiosity about anything that didn't directly relate to her business classes or her social life. "Since I realized I don't know much about where you grew up," she said smoothly. "It's important to understand the places that shape the people you care about." Stella had this amazing talent for turning gratitude into market research. "That's thoughtful," I said, for lack of anything better. She turned to face me then, and her expression was softer, more vulnerable than I'd seen in a while. "Bella, can I ask you something?" "Sure. Would it be weird if Jake and hypothetically speaking, if we kept in touch after this weekend?" My stomach dropped. Not because the idea of my friend and my brother together was inherently terrible, but because of how calculated the whole thing felt. The way she'd positioned herself at the barbecue, The sudden interest in his life, the carefully chosen outfits, it all felt orchestrated. I don't know, I said honestly. I guess it depends on what you mean by keeping in touch. Just friends, she said quickly. He mentioned he doesn't know many people in the city, and I thought maybe we could grab coffee sometime. You know, help him network. That should have been my first clue that Stella was lying. She'd never shown interest in helping anyone network before, and she definitely wasn't the type to maintain platonic friendships with men she found attractive. But I was still thinking like a friend instead of like someone who needed to protect herself. If that's what you both want, I said, trying to sound supportive, just be careful, okay? Jake's been through some rough relationships and he's really focused on his career right now. Of course, Stella said, and her smile was so warm and genuine that I almost believed she had his best interests at heart. I'd never want to complicate things for him. Famous last words. Jake picked her up exactly when he said he would, and they were gone for most of the day. When they returned that evening, both of them were laughing about some inside joke from their historical tour, and I noticed they'd somehow acquired matching coffee cups from what was apparently the world's most fascinating local museum gift shop. How was the sightseeing? I asked over dinner. Educational, Jake said, but he was looking at Stella when he said it. Your brother knows so much about local architecture, Stella added. I had no idea I was living with someone from such an interesting family. My parents ate it up, of course. Dad launched into stories about the town's founding families, while Mom began planning all the other local attractions Stella simply had to see on her next visit. Next visit? I asked, because this was news to me. Well, I was thinking, Stella said, glancing at Jake before continuing. Maybe I could come back for Labor Day weekend, if that's okay with everyone? Of course, Mom exclaimed. You're always welcome here, sweetheart. And just like that, Stella went from being my college roommate who needed a place to spend holidays to being a regular fixture in my family's plans. What I didn't know was that she and Jake had already exchanged numbers and made plans to meet up back at school. What I really didn't know was that this was all part of a carefully executed strategy to insert herself permanently into my life, starting with the person who mattered most to me. Have you ever experienced someone slowly taking over your life? Let me know in the comments because this was just the beginning. The drive back to campus was quiet, with Stella staring out the window and smiling this secretive little smile that should have terrified me. When I asked what she was thinking about, she just said, "How lucky I am to have such a wonderful friend and such a welcoming family." I thought she was being grateful. She was actually planning her takeover. Labor Day weekend came faster than I expected, and Stella was practically vibrating with excitement as we drove home from campus. She'd packed 3 different outfits for a 2-day visit and spent 40 minutes that morning perfecting what she claimed was her natural, no makeup look. You seem nervous, I observed as she checked her reflection in the passenger side mirror for the 10th time. Not nervous, just excited, she said. I've been looking forward to this all month. What she didn't mention was that she'd been texting with Jake almost daily since our last visit. I only found out about their constant communication by accident when her phone lit up with a message from him while she was in the shower, and I was trying to find her economics notes. Can't wait to see you this weekend. Hope Bella doesn't mind sharing your attention? The winky face made my stomach turn, though I couldn't articulate why. Maybe it was the implication that I was somehow in competition with my own brother for my friend's time. Maybe it was the casual way he assumed I'd be okay with being sidelined in my own family home. Or maybe it was the growing realization that both of them had been planning this reunion without including me in the conversation. When we arrived at my parents' house, Jake was already there, supposedly having arrived early to help Dad with some yard work. But when we pulled into the driveway, I noticed he was wearing his good jeans and the cologne that usually only came out for special occasions. "Stella," he called out, practically jogging over to our car before I'd even turned off the engine. "How was the drive?" "Perfect," she said, accepting his help with her luggage even though she'd packed light enough to carry everything herself. "Thanks for offering to help." I grabbed my own bag from the back seat, watching them smile at each other like they were sharing some private joke. This was different from their interaction at the barbecue. This felt intentional. "Hey, Jake," I said, reminding them that I was actually present. "Oh, hey, Bella," he said, giving me a distracted hug. "Good to see you too." Dinner that night was a masterclass in strategic positioning. Somehow, Stella ended up sitting next to Jake instead of across from him like usual, and somehow every conversation topic managed to circle back to things they'd discussed in their text conversations that I knew nothing about. "Remember when we were talking about that documentary?" she'd say to Jake. "Oh, the one about urban planning? Yeah, that was fascinating," he'd reply, launching into a discussion about city development that nobody else at the table had any context for. I felt like I was watching a tennis match where everyone else knew the score except me. I spent years wondering why I felt like a stranger at my own family gatherings. Turns out I was watching an audition I didn't know was happening. After dinner, while I helped Mom with the dishes, I could hear Jake and Stella laughing about something on the back porch. Their voices carried through the kitchen window, intimate and private in a way that made me feel like an intruder in my own home. They seem to be getting along well, Mom commented, rinsing soap suds off a dinner plate. Yeah, really well, I agreed, trying to keep the weird jealousy out of my voice. Is something bothering you, sweetheart? I paused, dish towel in hand, trying to figure out how to explain the uneasy feeling growing in my chest. I guess I just didn't expect them to become such good friends so quickly. Oh, honey, Mom said, giving me one of her knowing looks. I don't think friends is exactly what's developing between them. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? I mean, your brother hasn't looked this interested in someone since his college girlfriend. And Stella practically lights up whenever he's in the room. She handed me another plate to dry. I think we might be looking at a romance. But she's my roommate, I said, as if that somehow made the situation impossible. So? You introduced them, technically. You should feel proud of yourself for bringing two wonderful people together. Proud. That's what I should have felt. Instead, I felt like someone had rearranged all the furniture in my life when I wasn't looking, and now I couldn't find my way around my own house. That night, I lay in my childhood bedroom listening to the murmur of voices from the porch below my window. Jake and Stella were still out there, talking quietly in the darkness, and I had the sinking realization that something fundamental had changed. Stella wasn't just my college roommate anymore. She was becoming part of my family in a way that had nothing to do with me, and everything to do with my brother. The worst part? I could already sense that this new version of Stella, the one who was falling for Jake, was going to be different from the friend I'd known for 3 years. There was something sharper about her now, something competitive that hadn't existed before, something that made me feel like I was suddenly standing on the outside of my own life, watching someone else take my place at the center of it. Senior year changed everything, though it took me months to fully understand what was happening. Stella and Jake made their relationship official in October, which meant she now had a legitimate reason to be part of every family gathering, every holiday celebration, and every major milestone in my family's life. At first, I tried to be happy for them. They seemed genuinely smitten with each other, and Jake was more relaxed than I'd seen him in years. Stella was different, though. Not bad different, just more focused, more driven, like she'd found a goal worth pursuing and was attacking it with the same intensity she brought to her business classes. The changes started small. She'd mentioned job postings she'd seen that might interest me, always in cities hours away from where Jake worked. You'd love Seattle, she'd say, showing me listings for marketing positions on the West Coast. Think of all the coffee shops you could discover. I don't really want to move to Seattle, I'd reply, confused by her sudden interest in my career plans. Oh, I just thought you might want to explore your options, she'd say sweetly. You know, see what else is out there besides staying close to home. It took me longer than it should have to realize she was trying to encourage me to move away from my family. Not out of malice, exactly, but out of a desire to have more space to build her relationship with Jake, without me constantly around as a reminder of their origin story. Stella had this amazing ability to make exile sound like an adventure opportunity. The competition started in November. I'd been interviewing for entry-level marketing positions at companies in our area, planning to stay close to home after graduation. Then Stella announced she was applying for the same positions. Great minds think alike, she said when I found her researching the same company I just interviewed with. This place sounds like such a great opportunity. But you're a business major with an accounting focus, I pointed out. These are marketing positions. I've been thinking about branching out, she said breezily, exploring different career paths. What she meant was competing with me for everything I wanted, just to see if she could win. She did win, by the way. The job I'd interviewed for twice and researched extensively, they offered it to Stella after a single interview, charmed by her confidence and her ability to frame her accounting background as an asset to their marketing team. I'm so excited, she told Jake over dinner at my parents' house, practically glowing with triumph. It's exactly the kind of opportunity I was hoping for. That's wonderful, sweetheart, my mom said, beaming at her. We're so proud of you. I stabbed my mashed potatoes with more force than necessary, trying to swallow the bitter taste of watching my friend celebrate getting the job I'd wanted. Jake caught my expression and frowned. Weren't you interviewing there too, Bella? I was, I said carefully. But apparently they found a better fit. I'm sure something even better will come along for you, Stella said, reaching across the table to pat my hand in a gesture that felt patronizing rather than comforting. You know what they say? Everything happens for a reason. The thing about Stella was that she never did anything obviously cruel or malicious. She was always supportive, always encouraging, always saying the right things. But there was something underneath her sweetness now, something calculating that made every interaction feel like a chess game where I didn't know the rules. Christmas that year was the worst. Stella had been dating Jake for 3 months by then, which apparently qualified her for a starring role in all our family traditions. She helped Mom cook the Christmas dinner, laughed at Dad's terrible holiday jokes, and gave thoughtful gifts to everyone, including an expensive watch for Jake that was definitely more than a college student should have been able to afford. "Where did you get the money for this?" I asked her privately while the family was distracted with dessert. "I've been saving," she said simply. "Jake deserves nice things." But I knew her financial situation. I knew she was paying for college with loans and part-time jobs just like the rest of us. Expensive gifts meant she was prioritizing Jake over her own financial stability, which felt both romantic and slightly obsessive. "That's really generous," I said, trying to sound supportive. "He's worth it," she replied, and there was something possessive in her voice that made me uncomfortable. "Besides, I want his family to know how serious I am about him. His family already likes you, Stella. You don't have to prove anything." "Maybe," she said, watching Jake show off his new watch to Dad. "But it doesn't hurt to make sure." That night, lying in my childhood bedroom while Stella slept in the guest room that used to be reserved for my college friends, I realized that my best friend had become my competitor. Not just for jobs or opportunities, but for my place in my own family. The worst part was that she was winning, and everyone seemed happy about it except me. By spring semester, I'd started avoiding family gatherings where Stella would be present. It wasn't that I disliked seeing her and Jake together. They seemed genuinely happy, but being around them made me feel like a third wheel in my own life. Stella had perfected the art of subtle exclusion. She'd plan activities with my parents that I wasn't invited to join. She'd reference conversations with Jake that I hadn't been part of. She'd ask about family inside jokes and traditions with the enthusiasm of someone studying for a test, then incorporate them into her interactions with everyone except me. "You seem distant lately," Jake mentioned during one of our rare phone calls. "Is everything okay?" "Just busy with job hunting and final exams," I lied, not wanting to explain that his girlfriend was slowly erasing me from our family dynamic. "Stella mentioned you've been kind of quiet during her visits home. Are you sure there's nothing going on?" Of course she'd mentioned it. Stella had this way of bringing up my supposed moodiness or antisocial behavior whenever she wanted to position herself as the more positive, engaged family member. It was subtle but effective, making me look like the problem while she appeared concerned and caring. "I'm fine, Jake. Just focused on getting through senior year." "Well, if you need to talk or anything, you know I'm here. And Stella cares about you too. She's worried you're pulling away from everyone." The irony was suffocating. Stella was worried about me pulling away from the family dynamic she was actively restructuring to center around herself. After graduation, I took a job in a city 2 hours away from home. Not because I particularly wanted to leave, but because it was the best opportunity available after Stella had systematically competed for every local position I'd expressed interest in. She and Jake got engaged 6 months later, and suddenly my brother's girlfriend became my brother's fiancée, which meant her place in our family was permanent. Nothing says family forever like someone who studied your weaknesses for homework. The engagement party was held at my parents' house, naturally. I came home for the weekend to find the backyard decorated with lights and flowers, the good china set out on rented tables, and Stella holding court in the center of it all, wearing a dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Bella!" she exclaimed when she saw me, rushing over to give me a hug that felt performative rather than genuine. "I'm so glad you could make it. It means everything to have my oldest friend here to celebrate with us." "Wouldn't miss it," I said, trying to match her enthusiasm. "You know," she said, lowering her voice conspiratorially, "I was just telling your mother how much I appreciate everything your family has done for me over the years. How you all took me in and made me feel like I belonged. It's like I was meant to be part of this family." There it was, the casual rewriting of history that made my invitation to bring her home for holidays into some kind of destiny. As if our friendship had been nothing more than a delivery mechanism to get her to Jake. "Mom loves you," I said, because it was true and because I didn't know what else to say. "I love her too. All of you. It's amazing how natural this feels, being officially part of the family now." I spent the party watching Stella work the room like a politician, chatting with relatives she'd met once, remembering details about distant cousins' lives that she'd somehow cataloged, and accepting congratulations on her engagement with the grace of someone who'd always known this was her destiny. Jake looked happy. That was the worst part. He genuinely seemed thrilled to be marrying her, completely oblivious to the calculated nature of their entire relationship. To him, it was a romantic story about meeting the right person at the right time. To me, it was becoming clear that Stella had identified what she wanted and systematically acquired it, starting with my trust and ending with my brother's heart. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when my mother pulled me aside near the end of the evening. "I want to ask you something, and I hope you'll be honest," she said, leading me to a quiet corner of the garden. "Sure, Mom. Are you upset about Jake and Stella getting married?" "Why would I be upset?" I asked, genuinely confused by the question. "Well, she was your friend first, and now she'll be your sister-in-law. I know that can be complicated for some people. I want Jake to be happy," I said carefully. But sometimes I feel like Stella has replaced me in this family, like she's become the daughter you always wanted, and I'm just extra." Mom's face fell. "Oh, honey, that's not true at all, isn't it? When was the last time you called me just to chat? When was the last time you asked for my opinion about something, or included me in planning a family event? Stella's been here for 1 weekend a month for 2 years, and somehow she knows more about what's going on in this family than I do." "Stella is just very engaged," Mom said defensively. "She asks questions and shows interest." "So do I, Mom. I've been showing interest for 24 years. The conversation ended awkwardly, with both of us feeling misunderstood and defensive, but it crystallized something important for me. Stella hadn't just won Jake's heart. She'd won my place in my own family. 2 months later, I decided to host a dinner party. Not for any special occasion, just because I wanted to bring everyone together in my space, on my terms, where I could be the host instead of the outsider. I planned everything carefully, bought expensive ingredients for homemade pasta, set the table with dishes I'd been saving for special occasions, and prepared what I hoped would be a perfect evening of family bonding. I had no idea I was about to trigger the confrontation that would finally expose Stella's true nature to everyone who mattered. The day of my dinner party started like most disasters, with the best intentions and absolutely no warning about the chaos to come. I'd spent weeks planning every detail, from the handwritten invitations to the carefully curated playlist that would provide just enough background ambiance without overwhelming conversation. My apartment looked perfect, if I do say so myself. Candles flickered on every surface. Fresh flowers brightened the living room. And my small dining table was set with the good china I'd inherited from my grandmother. I'd even bought one of those expensive bottles of wine that makes you feel sophisticated just for owning it. The menu was ambitious but manageable. Homemade fettuccine with a cream sauce that had taken me 3 practice runs to perfect, garlic bread that actually required me to learn how to properly roast garlic, and a salad that looked deceptively simple, but involved 17 different ingredients arranged in careful layers. Jake was supposed to arrive at 6:30 with Stella. My parents would come at 7, giving us time for drinks and catching up before dinner. It was going to be perfect, intimate, elegant, and completely under my control for once. Of course, that's when life decided to remind me that control is mostly an illusion. Jake showed up at 5:15, looking frazzled and apologetic about his early arrival. "I'm so sorry," Jake said, running his hands through his hair. "Stella's running late, something about her spa appointment taking longer than expected, and I didn't want to just sit around the house waiting." "No problem," I said, though my carefully timed dinner prep was already starting to feel overwhelming. "Actually, maybe you could help me with something. I'm starting to panic about getting everything done on time." "Of course," Jake said, immediately rolling up his sleeves. "What do you need?" This is where I should mention that Jake had always been the better cook between the two of us. While I'd been learning to survive on ramen and determination through college, he'd been teaching himself to make actual meals out of necessity and genuine interest. Dad had taught us both the basics growing up, but Jake had taken it seriously while I'd treated it like a chore to escape as soon as possible. 20 minutes later, Jake had transformed my kitchen chaos into something that resembled actual organization. He took over the pasta sauce, adjusted my seasoning, and somehow managed to prep the garlic bread while simultaneously talking me through the timing for everything else. "You don't have to do this," I protested weakly, watching him work with impressive competence. "Yes, I do," he said, stirring the cream sauce with professional-level technique that I definitely didn't possess. "You invited us over for dinner, and I showed up early and stressed. The least I can do is actually help instead of just sitting around being useless." By the time my parents arrived, exactly on time, naturally, Jake had produced a meal that looked and smelled infinitely better than anything I could have managed on my own. The pasta was perfectly al dente, The cream sauce had exactly the right consistency, and the garlic bread was golden brown and fragrant. "This smells incredible," Mom said, accepting a glass of wine and surveying the spread. "You've outdone yourself, sweetheart." Actually, I started to explain about Jake's contribution, but he cut me off with a shake of his head. "Bella planned everything perfectly," he said generously. "I just followed her lead. What do you think will happen next? Let me know in the comments if you've ever had a family gathering go completely off the rails before it even started." Dad immediately gravitated toward the kitchen to compliment Jake's technique, while Mom settled into conversation about how lovely everything looked. The atmosphere was warm and relaxed, exactly what I'd hoped for when I planned this evening. Stella, meanwhile, still hadn't arrived. Her absence hung in the air like an unspoken question, but nobody wanted to address it directly. Jake checked his phone occasionally but didn't seem particularly worried, and I tried not to read too much into the fact that she was now 45 minutes late to a dinner party in her honor. "Should we wait?" Mom asked delicately when it became clear we'd moved past fashionably late into actually rude territory. "Let's go ahead and start," Jake said, glancing at his phone one more time. "She'll catch up when she gets here." We were just settling around my dining table when the front door opened and Stella finally made her entrance, looking perfectly put together and offering vague apologies about traffic and losing track of time at the salon. "Sorry." "Everyone!" she called out breezily, hanging up her coat and joining us at the table without any real sense of urgency or embarrassment about keeping everyone waiting. "I hope you didn't start without me." "We were just sitting down," Jake said mildly, though I caught the slight tension in his voice that suggested this wasn't the first time Stella's concept of punctuality had caused issues. She settled into her seat, accepted a glass of wine, and began surveying the food with the critical eye of someone evaluating a restaurant meal, rather than a home-cooked dinner prepared by family. And that's when the evening took its spectacular turn toward disaster. The first few minutes of dinner were exactly what family gatherings should be: easy conversation, shared laughter, and food that brought people together around a common table. Dad told stories about his recent golf game. Mom updated us on neighborhood gossip, and Jake shared funny anecdotes about his latest work projects. I felt myself relaxing into the evening, proud of how everything had come together and grateful for Jake's help in making it actually edible. The pasta was better than any restaurant version I'd tried. The wine was perfectly paired, and even the salad somehow looked like something from a food magazine. Stella participated in the conversation, but there was something off about her contributions. She seemed irritated by something, making subtle comments about having a stressful day, and looking around my apartment like she was cataloging everything for future reference, rather than enjoying the moment. "The sauce has an interesting flavor," she said during a lull in conversation, poking at her pasta with her fork in a way that suggested investigation rather than appreciation. "Jake added some white wine to deglaze the pan," I explained. "It gives it more depth." Stella said noncommittally, taking another small bite. "I suppose that's one approach." There was something dismissive in her tone that made me glance at Jake, who was focused on his own meal and didn't seem to notice his wife's lukewarm response to his cooking. "How's work going, Stella?" Mom asked politely, clearly trying to include her in the conversation that was flowing easily among the rest of us. "Bella mentioned you got promoted last month." "It's fine," Stella replied, still examining her food like she was looking for something to criticize. "Busy. Lots of responsibility. Some people don't appreciate how demanding my position actually is." "I'm sure they appreciate having someone so capable," Dad said diplomatically, because he was fundamentally incapable of not trying to make people feel better. "You'd think so," Stella said, and there was an edge to her voice that made everyone at the table slightly uncomfortable. "But apparently, some people think anyone can do what I do." I had no idea what she was talking about, and from the confused expressions around the table, neither did anyone else. But the atmosphere had shifted from warm and familial to vaguely tense, like we were all waiting for the other shoe to drop. This felt like someone who'd spent too much energy maintaining a perfect facade and was finally starting to crack around the edges. "Well," Dad said carefully, "we're certainly proud of everything you've accomplished." "Are you?" Stella asked, and now her voice had taken on a sharper quality that made Jake look up from his plate with concern. "Because sometimes I feel like people take my achievements for granted, like they assume everything just comes easily to me." "Stella," Jake said quietly, clearly recognizing danger signs that the rest of us were still trying to interpret. Maybe we should what?" she interrupted, her voice getting louder. "Pretend everything's perfect? Pretend that some people don't have to work twice as hard to prove themselves while others get handed opportunities on silver platters?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Mom and Dad were staring at their plates, Jake looked like he wanted to disappear, and I felt like I was watching someone having a breakdown in slow motion. "I'm not sure I understand what you're upset about," I said carefully, though I was starting to suspect this had very little to do with work stress and everything to do with whatever had been building up in Stella's head for months. She set down her fork and looked directly at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something cold and calculating that made me feel like I was seeing her real face for the first time. "Don't you?" she said, and her smile was sharp around the edges. "Really? You have no idea why I might be frustrated?" And that's when the mask finally came off completely. "I mean," Stella continued, her voice taking on that dangerously sweet tone that usually preceded something awful, "some people are just naturally good at getting other people to solve their problems for them." The comment hung in the air like smoke from a fire nobody wanted to acknowledge. Mom and Dad exchanged glances across the table, and I felt my stomach tighten with the familiar sensation of walking into a conversation that was about more than what was actually being said. "What are you talking about?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I didn't really want to know. Stella gestured around the table with mock appreciation. "This lovely dinner party, for example, so perfectly orchestrated, so beautifully presented, must have taken hours of careful planning." "It did," I said slowly, not sure where this was heading, but certain I wasn't going to like the destination. "And yet, somehow, you couldn't actually manage to cook any of it yourself." Her smile was razor sharp now. "Lucky for you, Jake was here to save the day. Again. You know that moment when someone finally shows you exactly who they really are? This was mine." "Stella," Mom said quietly, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. "What?" "It's true," Stella said, her voice getting stronger as she gained momentum. "Some people spend their whole lives taking care of everyone else's problems, and some people create the problems that need solving. Some people work for what they have, and some people just expect others to handle the difficult parts." I stared at her, trying to process what was happening. This wasn't the Stella who'd lived in my dorm room for 3 years, or the one who'd charmed my family into thinking she was the perfect girlfriend for Jake. This was someone else entirely. Someone who'd apparently been hiding behind a carefully constructed facade for longer than I'd realized. "Are you talking about me?" I asked, though the answer was obvious from the way she was looking at me. "I'm talking about patterns," she said smoothly. "Like how you invited us all over for dinner but somehow couldn't manage to actually cook it yourself. Like how you always seem to need rescuing whenever things get difficult. Like how some people have spent their entire lives being taken care of by others, and then act like they've accomplished something independently." The words hit me like physical blows. Everything she was saying was carefully crafted to sound reasonable while being utterly devastating. The kind of attack that someone plans in advance, testing each phrase for maximum damage. "Jake offered to help because he arrived early and I was running behind," I said, trying to keep my voice steady while my heart hammered against my ribs. "Right. How convenient." Stella's laugh was cold and humorless. "Must be nice to always have someone willing to step in when you're not capable of handling things yourself. Must be exhausting for everyone else, though, constantly having to manage your limitations." The silence that followed was deafening. Dad was staring at his plate like he wanted to disappear into it. Mom looked like she'd been slapped, and Jake was frozen with his fork halfway to his mouth, staring at his wife like he'd never seen her before. I felt something shift inside me then. Not anger, exactly, but a kind of crystalline clarity that comes when someone finally stops pretending and shows you what you're really dealing with. I picked up my fork, took a deliberately careful bite of pasta, chewed slowly, and swallowed. Then I looked directly at Stella and smiled. "You know what's interesting about this dinner?" I said conversationally. "What?" she snapped, clearly expecting me to either apologize or escalate the fight. "The food you've been criticizing for the past 20 minutes? The cooking you've been using as evidence of my general incompetence?" I paused, savoring the moment. Jake made all of it. Sometimes the most satisfying revenge is just letting someone destroy themselves in front of witnesses. The color drained from Stella's face so fast I thought she might faint. Her mouth opened and closed like she was trying to form words that wouldn't come, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked completely and utterly speechless. "That's right," I continued, my voice still perfectly calm and pleasant. "Every single thing you've been subtly insulting. The sauce that's too rich. The pasta that's somehow not quite right. The seasoning you've been questioning with every bite. Your husband cooked all of it while you were getting your hair done and showing up an hour late to a dinner party that was supposed to include you." I didn't," Stella stammered, looking around the table like she was searching for an escape route. "You didn't what? Didn't realize you were insulting your husband's cooking?" Didn't think we'd notice you've spent this entire evening criticizing everyone except yourself? Or didn't think there would be any consequences for finally showing us who you really are? Jake set down his fork slowly, and when he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled in a way that suggested he was barely holding on to his composure. Stella, what exactly have you been saying about the food? She turned to face him, panic flickering across her features as she realized the full scope of what had just happened. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. How did you mean it? Jake asked, and there was something dangerous in his quiet tone. Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you've spent the last half hour using my cooking as a weapon against my sister. Jake, please, you have to understand. What I understand, he interrupted, is that you just spent 20 minutes telling my family that my sister is incompetent, manipulative, and unable to take care of herself. And you did it while eating food that I prepared specifically to help her host a nice evening for all of us. The silence stretched like a rubber band about to snap. Dad cleared his throat uncomfortably. Mom was staring at Stella with an expression I'd never seen before, and Jake looked like he was seeing his wife clearly for the first time in their entire relationship. I think, Dad said carefully, we might all benefit from taking a step back and— No, Jake said firmly. I think we need to finish this conversation right now. Stella, I want you to explain to me what just happened here. Stella's composure finally cracked completely. Fine. You want to know what happened? I'll tell you what happened. Her voice was rising now, all pretense of sweetness gone. I'm tired of pretending that everything is wonderful when it's not. I'm tired of watching everyone fawn over Bella like she's some kind of saint when she's just ordinary. I'm tired of being compared to someone who's never had to work for anything in her life. Never had to work for anything? I repeated, genuinely stunned by the accusation. Please. You grew up in this perfect little family where everyone adored you and made excuses for you and treated you like you could do no wrong. You've never had to prove yourself to anyone. You've never had to earn your place or fight for recognition or wonder if you're good enough. Tears were streaming down her face now, but they were angry tears, bitter and full of resentment. Do you have any idea what it's like to constantly compete with someone who doesn't even know there's a competition? And there it was, the truth that had been hiding behind 4 years of carefully constructed friendship and family integration. Stella hadn't just been insecure about her place in our family. She'd been consumed with jealousy from the very beginning. So this was never about loving Jake, I said quietly. This was about beating me. No, that's not— It wasn't— She looked at Jake desperately, but his expression had gone completely cold. Jake, you have to believe me. I do love you. I love all of you. I needed to know I was enough. I needed to prove that I deserved this family as much as she does. By tearing down my sister? Jake's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried more fury than any shouting could have. By making her feel unwelcome in her own family? By turning every gathering into some kind of performance where you had to prove you were better than her? I never meant for it to go this far, Stella said. But even as she spoke, we could all hear how hollow it sounded. Yes, you did, I said, and my voice was steadier than I felt. This is exactly what you meant to do. You just didn't expect to get caught. Jake stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with a sound that made everyone flinch. I think we need to go. Jake, please. Now, Stella. She gathered her purse with shaking hands, makeup smudged and face blotchy from crying, looking nothing like the composed woman who'd walked into my apartment an hour earlier. At the door, she turned back one last time. I'm sorry, she said, but it was unclear whether she was speaking to me, to Jake, or to my parents. No, you're not, I replied, and for once I wasn't being sarcastic. You're sorry you got caught. There's a difference. They left without another word, and suddenly my apartment felt enormous and quiet, and somehow cleaner than it had all evening. The weeks that followed were unlike anything I'd experienced before. For the first time in years, my phone wasn't buzzing with texts from Stella asking for advice, sharing gossip, or making plans for the next family gathering. The silence felt both liberating and unsettling, like finally getting rid of a chronic headache and then missing the familiar ache. Jake called me the day after the dinner, his voice careful and strained in a way I'd never heard before. I owe you an apology, he said without preamble. Several apologies, actually. Jake, you don't— Yes, I do. I've been thinking about everything Stella said, and everything you said, and I'm starting to see patterns I should have noticed years ago. He paused, and I could hear the weight of realization in his silence. She really has been competing with you, hasn't she? It was the question I'd been waiting years for him to ask, and now that he finally had, I didn't know how to answer it without sounding petty or vindictive. I think she was insecure about her place in the family, I said carefully, And maybe that made her feel like she needed to prove she was better than me. By applying for the same jobs as you? By making subtle digs at family gatherings? By spending 4 years systematically undermining your relationship with our parents? His voice was getting tighter with each word. God, Bella, how long has this been going on? Since college, really. But it got worse after you two got serious. Why didn't you say anything? What was I supposed to say? Your girlfriend is trying to replace me in our family? You were happy, Jake. I didn't want to be the bitter sister who couldn't handle her brother falling in love. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Jake spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. I think I married someone I don't actually know. That conversation was the beginning of what Jake later described as the worst month of my life. He started paying attention to things he'd previously overlooked. The way Stella spoke about me when I wasn't around, her reactions when our parents praised my achievements, her subtle efforts to position herself as the family favorite. He also started noticing how she interacted with other people when she thought he wasn't watching. The competitiveness wasn't limited to me, he discovered. Stella had a pattern of identifying what other people valued most and then trying to prove she could do it better. She told my boss that you have emotional regulation issues that make family gatherings difficult. He told me during another late-night phone call 3 weeks after the dinner. Apparently, she's been positioning herself as the patient, understanding sister-in-law who has to manage your jealousy and mood swings. I felt physically sick, not just because of what Stella had said, but because of how calculated it was. She'd been working to isolate me from my own family while simultaneously controlling the narrative about why I seemed distant or unhappy at gatherings. There's something uniquely devastating about discovering that someone has been rewriting your story behind your back. What are you going to do? I asked. I'm going to ask my wife to explain herself, he said. And depending on her answer, I might be calling a divorce lawyer. The confrontation between Jake and Stella happened on a Tuesday evening while I was at work, but I heard about it afterward from 3 different sources. Jake? My mother, and surprisingly, Stella herself. According to Jake, Stella initially tried to deny everything, then claimed she'd been protecting the family from my emotional instability, and finally broke down and admitted that she'd been jealous of my relationship with our parents since college. According to Mom, Stella had called her crying and begging her to talk sense into Jake because he was overreacting to a misunderstanding and letting Bella poison him against her. According to Stella, who left me a 20-minute voicemail that was equal parts apology and accusation, I had manipulated everyone into taking my side and destroyed her marriage out of spite because I couldn't handle not being the center of attention anymore. The voicemail was actually helpful in its way. It confirmed that Stella still didn't understand what she'd done wrong. She wasn't sorry for the years of manipulation and competition. She was sorry that her strategy had finally backfired. I keep thinking about our wedding day, Jake told me a few days later. How happy she looked. How perfect everything seemed. And now I'm wondering if she was happy because she'd won some competition I didn't even know we were having. Maybe the happiness was real, I offered. Because despite everything, I didn't want to believe that every moment of their relationship had been calculated. Maybe she really did love you, just not for the right reasons. Maybe, he said, but it doesn't matter now. I can't be married to someone who sees my family as obstacles to overcome instead of people to love. 6 weeks later, Jake moved out of their shared apartment and filed for divorce. Stella contested it initially, demanding counseling and a trial separation instead of a permanent split. But when Jake's lawyer presented evidence of her pattern of manipulation, including emails she'd sent to potential employers specifically to undermine my job applications, she realized that fighting would only expose more of her behavior to scrutiny. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. Stella moved back to Connecticut, claiming she needed to be closer to her family during this difficult time. Really, I think she needed to start over somewhere that didn't contain quite so many people who now knew exactly who she was. A year later, I'm hosting Christmas dinner at my apartment again, but this time, everything is different. Jake is here, looking more relaxed than he has in years. My parents are here, having spent the morning helping me prep vegetables and arguing good-naturedly about the proper way to season stuffing. And conspicuously absent is the woman who spent 4 years trying to rewrite our family dynamics. Are you sure you don't want help with the turkey? Mom asks for the 3rd time, hovering near my kitchen like she's afraid I'll burn down the apartment. Mom, I've been cooking for myself for 6 years, I remind her, basting the bird with what I hope looks like professional competence. I think I can handle 1 dinner. Besides, Jake adds from where he's mashing potatoes with unnecessary violence, she's got backup this time. We're cooking together like civilized people. It's just such a big bird, and there are so many moving parts. Mom trails off, then catches herself. I'm sorry. I know you're perfectly capable. I think I'm still adjusting to not having to worry about other complications. She doesn't say Stella's name, but we all know what she means. For months after the divorce, we tiptoed around topics that might reference her, avoided mentioning the dinner party that started everything, and generally acted like we were all recovering from collective emotional food poisoning. But gradually, things settled into a new normal. A better normal, if I'm being honest. The most significant change has been in how my family treats me. It's like someone lifted a filter I didn't know was there, and suddenly they can see me clearly again. Mom calls just to chat. Dad asks for my opinion about everything from investment strategies to whether he should try a new golf instructor. And Jake has become almost protective of our family time in a way that feels completely new. I lost a couple years there, he told me a few months ago. I was so focused on keeping Stella happy that I stopped paying attention to whether anyone else was okay. That's not going to happen again. You weren't the only one who got manipulated, I reminded him. She was really good at it. Still, you're my sister. I should have had your back. You do now, I said, and it was true. Since the divorce, Jake has gone out of his way to include me in decisions, to make sure my voice is heard in family discussions, and to shut down anyone who tries to treat me like I'm somehow less important than I used to be. The turkey comes out perfectly golden. The sides Jake brought are restaurant quality, and somehow my small apartment manages to accommodate all of us without feeling cramped. We settle in for dinner, and I find myself marveling at how different this feels from last Christmas. You know what's funny? Mom says as we're passing dishes around the table. This feels more like family than some of those big gatherings we used to have. How so? I ask, though I think I know what she means. Less performance, more connection. Dad answers for her. Nobody trying to prove anything or compete for attention. Just us being ourselves. It's true. Without Stella's presence, we've all relaxed into more authentic versions of ourselves. Conversations flow naturally instead of feeling like strategic maneuvers. Laughter comes easier. Even the silences are comfortable instead of loaded with unspoken tension. I have something to tell you all, Jake says, as we're settling in the living room with coffee and leftover pie. I've been seeing someone. Mom practically bounces in her seat. Tell us everything. Her name is Rachel, she's a teacher, and she has absolutely no interest in competing with anyone about anything, Jake says, grinning. She met Bella 2 weeks ago when we ran into each other at the grocery store. And her first comment was about how obvious it is that we're related because we have the same terrible sense of humor. Smart woman, Dad says approvingly. What else do we need to know about her? She's kind, she's funny, she thinks family dinners should be about enjoying each other's company instead of keeping score. And she's excited to meet the sister who taught me that cooking is actually a form of stress relief. I feel something warm and grateful settle in my chest. Not just because Jake has found someone who seems genuinely good for him, but because this new person in his life sees me as an asset rather than a threat. When do we get to meet her? Mom asks. Next month, if you're all okay with it. She wants to come to Sunday dinner and meet everyone properly. Of course we're okay with it, I say. Anyone who makes you happy and appreciates good family dysfunction is welcome at my table anytime. As the evening winds down and my family gets ready to leave, I look around my apartment and realize something important. This is what I was trying to create when I planned that disastrous dinner party a year ago. Not perfection, not impressive presentation, just connection. Just family being family without anyone trying to rewrite the script. Thank you for hosting, Mom says, giving me a hug that feels more genuine than any we've shared in years. This was exactly what we all needed. Same time next year? I ask. Wouldn't miss it, Jake says, already reaching for his coat. But next time, I'm bringing Rachel. Fair warning, she's going to want to help cook, and she actually knows what she's doing. Even better, I say. Maybe I'll finally learn something. After everyone leaves, I sit in my quiet apartment surrounded by the pleasant chaos of a successful family gathering. Wine glasses that need washing, crumbs on the coffee table, indentations in the couch cushions where people I love spent an evening feeling comfortable and welcome. It turns out that the best revenge against someone who tried to steal your life is living that life better than they ever could have. And the best defense against manipulation is building relationships based on truth instead of performance. Stella may have won a few battles along the way, but in the end, she lost the war because she never understood that family isn't something you take over or compete for. It's something you contribute to, protect, and treasure. And now that I have mine back, I'm never letting anyone threaten it again. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories about finding your way back to the relationships that matter most. Sometimes the best family moments happen after you've cleared away the people who were preventing you from having them in the first place. The funny thing is, I genuinely hope Stella finds happiness somewhere. Just preferably very far away from anyone else's family.